Hi, I'm Larry Puckett, the DCC guy. Today I want to take on something of a weighty issue, specifically how much weight to add to your cars and other rolling stock to get the best performance out of them without overloading your locomotives. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, before we get started, I want to ask you to take a second to subscribe. Click on the subscribe box, and when that comes up, click on the little bell right next to it and click all. So what I want to do today then, as I said in the opening, is take a look at weighting cars. So why then do you really want to add weight to cars? After all, it makes it more difficult for your locomotives to pull those trains, particularly up grades and things of that nature. So why do you want to go about adding weight to them? Well, the most important reason right off is it makes them track better. They hold the rails a lot better. And it's a simple matter of gravity. The more weight you have in the car, the more it's going to be pulled down towards the center of the earth, and it's going to hold the track a lot better, particularly rough track. And I'm not talking about nasty track that you've seen on some layouts, I'm sure, but I'm talking about, even the best laid track that I know of has some rough spots. And no matter how hard you work at it, you're always going to have locations and turnouts, for example, such as point rails themselves. That can be a point of some roughness. The rail joiners going into the turnout can result in a certain amount of roughness. And the flangeways, you can run into problems there. But most importantly, I think, in turnouts, are the actual frogs themselves, because there are gaps in there between rails at the frogs, and it is possible for cars to bump through there. And if they are rough, and if the car doesn't weigh enough, that's one reason that you can get derails at your turnouts, which lead to shorts and shut you down. So right off, if you put a little bit of extra weight in them, you're going to have them track better, they're going to hold the rails better in normal operations. Now, it's also less of an issue on straight flat track than it is on curves and in industrial areas and yards and things like that. Because as the train is moving along, as long as there's no rough spots, for the most part, your light cars are not going to be bouncing all over the rails. It really isn't as much of an issue when you're pulling a string of cars as it is when you're pushing a string. Now, when are those kind of situations coming up? Well, anytime that you're pushing a string of cars into a siding, into an industrial lead, and particularly in a yard where you're pushing cars up a yard ladder through a bunch of turnouts in a row and into a particular track, that can really become a real problem, because if you've got a lightweight car pushing a bunch of heavier cars, or if it's in the middle of a string of cars, then it's very likely that that might derail going in through there. And that's probably one of the most problematic situations that you're going to run into, except for one. And I'm going to talk about that in just a second. So by simply adding some weight to the car, it's going to track better as it goes through those turnouts, up the yard ladder, and finally into the track that you're trying to position it. Now, I said that a very important area, though, that can be very problematic are curves and helices. So let's talk about that. Why is that an issue? Well, let's say that you have a lightweight car and a string of about 15 cars, and you're going around a sharp curve. Well, it's a matter of the laws of physics that those cars are going to try to take a straight line. So they're going to be pulling all of the cars in that curve towards the center of the curve itself. And if your cars are not weighted enough, they can actually pull a lighter car off of the rails. So you're more likely to have derailments in curves, and the tighter the curve, the more likely it's going to happen. And one particular area are helices. And the reason helices are so bad is because you're either going up a hill or you're going down a hill. And very often you're talking about something between 1.5% and 2% of a grade in those curves. And that can really be a problem because you're going to be pulling that string of cars around a curve. So they're going to be trying to go straight through the lineup instead of taking that curve. And you're going to be either pulling up a hill or down, or you're going to be going down a hill. And the result is there is a much greater tendency in those kind of situations for lightweight cars to be pulled off of the rails and put your string of cars on the ground, and maybe even on the floor if you don't have sides to your helix. So that's the real collection of reasons as to why you want to have properly weighted cars on your model railroad. So how do you know how much weight to add and how much is too much? Well, let's take a look at that now. If you do a search on your web browser for NMRA Recommended Practice 20.1, that will take you to the NMRA's website and to the specific recommended practice for car weights. And a number of years ago, like many things in the NMRA, they put together a committee to look at car weights, and they came up with a formula for how you can weight your cars. And there is a different formula for each scale. Unfortunately for you guys in the UK, there is not one for OO. There's one for HO, there's one for S. All the other scales seem to be represented. I'm really surprised they didn't do OO, because at one time we had a certain amount of OO here in the US as well. But unfortunately, maybe they thought that HO would be close enough to cover OO. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about the HO scale recommended practice for weighting cars. So what is that then? Well, basically it's very simple. You take and you specify 1 ounce for each car. And then for each inch of length, you add another ½ ounce of weight. So a 6-inch car, it's going to be 1 ounce plus 3 ounces, or 4 ounces of weight for a 6-inch car. So that's pretty straightforward. 1 ounce for the car, 1/2 ounce for each inch of length of the car. And that will give you just the right amount of weight. And they've done a lot of tests on this, and it works, let me tell you, because I've weighted just about all of my cars. And one thing I recommend that you do, and I do this all the time, is every time you buy a new car or pull an old one out of storage that you might not have weighted previously, go ahead and check it at that time and make sure before you put it on the layout that it is the correct weight. Otherwise, you're going to forget about it, and then down the road, you're going to have a problem. So what I want to do now is zoom in here on the benchtop, and we'll take a look at how I go about weighting the various rolling stock cars on my layout. Okay, what I have right here is a basic electronic scale that can measure in both ounces and in grams, and I use this for calculating and checking my car weights. So right off, let's take a look at what I've got here. Right up here on this piece of paper, I have made up a little chart of different car lengths, 36, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80-foot cars. And right next to that, I've given the number of inches for each one. And right here is the weight that it should add up to once you account for the NMR equation. So for a 40-foot car, being 5.5 inches long, it should weigh in at 4 ounces. So I've just got this chart right here in front of me all the time so that I can quickly, without having to do any mental calculations, weigh my cars. So let's take a look. And basically then, what I do is when I'm going to put a car into service, like this 40-foot box car here, and I'll show you, it comes in at a little over 5.5 inches in length with my ruler here. And a 40-foot at 5.5 should be 4 ounces. So let me turn this on. Okay, so it's zeroed out, and we're going to weigh it. Now, if you look right there, you can see it comes in at exactly 4 ounces. And that's because I've already added weights to this car. So let me show you how I do that, because it's very straightforward and simple to do. Right here, you can see I have all of these metal weights that I've added to bring the car up to exactly 4 ounces. Each one of these little rectangles weighs 1/4 of an ounce. And I'll show you those here in a minute when we take a look at various ways to add weight to cars. So these are just stuck in here. Very simple, quick, easy thing to do. And you just put your car on the scale, and then you can just start adding weights to it one by one to increase the weight until you reach the point that you need. 6 ounces, that's a bit much. And this one's right on. So let's take a look then at different ways that you can add weight to your rolling stock, because there's a number of different scenarios and ways that you can go about doing this. Now, first off, for you guys in the UK, I'm going to show you how I do a brake van here. This is a fairly straightforward, easy pop the shell off. I think I had to break it off, but I managed to get it out of there. One of these days, I'm going to glue it back into place. So you can see this car here is right at 4 inches long, and that means that it should weigh 2 ounces plus 1 ounce for the car itself. So it should weigh somewhere around 3 ounces. So let me see, I've already weighed this one, and it comes in at 2.9 ounces. So this one is right on. Now, this one here, however, weighs or comes in at 3 inches. So at 3 inches, it should be 1.5 ounces plus 1 would be 2.5. So as you can see, this one comes in at 1.7. So it's a bit on the light side. So I can keep adding more weight to this until I bring it up to the full 2.5 ounces that I need. 2.5, perfect. So I just need to permanently install those extra weights, that 3/4 ounce in there, and that's going to be perfect for that weight range. Now I will point out for you guys in the UK, and I'll make a link to the video that I'm going to talk about and put it right up here above me. But basically, if you go to the McKinley Railway YouTube channel, he has a very, very large operating model railway there. And he has done a lot of work on weighting his cars. And he uses a slightly modified formula from the NMRA. It comes out to about half the weight of what you would calculate based on the NMRA formula. And he explains that the reason he does that is because British locomotives just don't pull like American locomotives do. They can be a lot lighter and not pull as much freight weight as the American locomotives do. Plus, American locomotives, for our diesels, we operate multiple units. With our steam locomotives, they do weigh a lot. I will admit that. And I can remember back when I used to make up lead slugs to add to my my steam locomotives so that they would pull up to the amount of cars that were properly weighted. So you have to make a decision as to whether or not it's going to work for you. If you're operating primarily on a fairly flat layout with reasonable curves, you might be able to get away with half of the weight of the NMRA specified guidelines, or the RPs. But I suggest you try it out on your layout, and remember, if you start running into problems with cars derailing while backing up through turnouts and the like, adding more weight can help that. Okay, so what I want to do now is take a look at different ways that you can weight cars, because there are several different approaches you can follow. And I already showed you how I weighted this car by adding these individual little weights to the car itself. Now these I got off of either eBay, I think eBay, and all these are steel motorcycle tire weights. And they are used, you can actually cut them apart, and then they have this plastic backing here on them so that can be peeled off. And, and it can be a pain in the neck to get it to start. I'll show you here. There we go. So that will peel off, and then it's got this mastic on the back side of it, so it will stick to your cars. And I've stuck these to the underside of cars. I've put them inside of cars like I did with this boxcar here. And there are a number of different ways that you can use these. And these weigh, like I showed you, 1/4 of an ounce each. So you can start putting these in, you can stack them up, do whatever is necessary to get your car weight up to the specified amount using the NMRA recommended practice. But what if you've got some other types of cars? Well, let's take a look. One in particular that can be a real pain in the neck are various gondolas. Now this here is an old E&B Valley gondola kit, and even though I've got a bunch of girders in it, it weighs in very light. It weighs in at 1.5 ounces. And yet this one is, let's see how long it is. Should have measured this in advance. But it is 6 ounces, it's 9.5 inches long. So at 9.5 inches, it should come in and weigh 5 3/4 ounces here. So, but it doesn't, like I said, it doesn't weigh anywhere near 5 3/4 ounces. It needs a lot more weight at it. So how could I go about that? Well, one thing I could do is I could use metal girders, if I could find them, and put those in and use scrap loads of various kinds to increase the weight. Another thing I could do is I could put in these weights like this to get the weight up. So we'll see. There we go. That brings it up to 3.5 ounces almost. Another option is to take lead birdshot. Now this is lead shot of various sizes for loading into shotgun shells. And you can still buy this here in the US. I don't know about the UK. They might have steel or tungsten or some other kind that you can purchase. But at any rate, you can take this and pour it into all of these little recesses on the bottom of a car, and then pour in diluted PVA cement. And that will seep down in, just like applying PVA to ballast, it will seep down in here, dry, and hold that lead shot in place. And this lead shot can be quite handy for use on gondolas like that, on various kinds of flat cars. This is a pulp rack for loading pulp wood into. And so it's got a lot of spaces in here where you could add more weight. This gondola here actually is, I think, properly weighted. Okay, let's take a look. That comes in at roughly 3 ounces, and it is roughly 6 inches long. So at 6 inches, we're somewhere between 4.5, so about 4.25 ounces, something like that. And it's 3 ounces, so this is a bit light. And it has a piece of metal in here. I don't remember what it was. It's hidden underneath of this floor. And that's one other thing you can do is you can purchase in some places metal sheets, metal lead even. They used to sell lead ones here in the US. I haven't seen those in a long time, but they sell those that you can put in the bottom of a car, paint it to match the inside, and you've got the added weight that way. Another option, and this is something that is not available very much here in the US anymore, but this is lead foil. And a dentist friend of mine used to save these for me because these were used in the little x-ray film packets when they took x-rays of your teeth. And so I've just got all of these pieces of lead that are left over. So I could fill up my gondola with this and, crumple it up, and it's going to look like scrap metal. So that's one thing you can do, is take pieces of this. You could also take pieces of lead and wrap it in aluminum foil and weather it to make it look like scrap, crushed scrap metal, and do a gondola load for that. Now, as far as these Pulp Racks, as I said, this one weighs, let's see, this one came in at what did I say, 6 inches? roughly 6 inches in length. So it should weigh 4¼ but it really came in at 2½. But when I add a pulp load to it, it comes in at 4.3 ounces. So quite the proper weight for it. So this is a case where in one situation with a load of pulp in it, it weighs the proper weight. Without it, it's going to be lightweight. So what do you do in cases like that? Well, in cases like that where I've got loaded cars that weigh the proper amount and unloaded cars that are light, I would always put these lighter cars towards the rear of the train. And that should be a standing order on your model railroad for your operators, to always put light cars towards the rear of the train, because that way they're not as likely to derail, particularly going around curves and in helices. Now, another one that can often be a problem are these coal hoppers. This looks like it's an Athearn car here. And you can see it has these metal weights here. These are steel weights that you install when you're putting the kit together. And then let's see how much this one weighs without additional weight. It comes in at 2 ounces. Now this, I believe, is about a 36-foot car. Let's see here. Comes in at 4½ inches. So it's about a 36-foot car, somewhere in that realm. It should weigh about 3½ ounces. But as I say, it only weighs 2 ounces, so it's light. However, I made up these loads for these Athearn 55-ton hoppers. So this is just a white resin material, and I cast a whole bunch of these and painted them black and then glued on the coal here. So it makes a very nice coal load, and it drops right into place here in the car. Now let's see how much it weighs with that in place. Comes in at about 3½ ounces. So just a perfect weight for that car. So again, this is one of those cases where when you take your weights out, when you take your loads out, you need to make sure that these empty hoppers, if they're not run in a complete string of empties, that these are placed towards the rear of the train. Otherwise, you run the risk of derailments. Now here's another nice car. I think this I believe is a BLI car, but I'm not 100% sure. They came pre-weighted, so if you check these out, you'll see it comes in at about 3 ounces. And this is a not quite 4½ inches, so it's coming in at about right for this size car. So it has been properly weighted. Now, one of the nice things about tank cars is typically the way that they are put together is when you buy the model, if it's a kit, the bottom is separate from the top. So that allows you in most cases to be able to add in additional weight to the inside here before you put the kit together completely. So keep that in mind. And in those cases, you can either put this kind in or you can use the other type of weights. Now, passenger cars usually are pretty easy to deal with because they have lots of room inside where you can tuck a lot of weight. So basically then, this is one that I have not weighted. I've not even decided if I'm going to keep it. I bought it because, well, I planned on stripping it and repainting it for the Southern, but I think I have enough Southern cars already. But at any rate, this one comes in at about 11½ inches. So this should weigh somewhere about 6½ ounces or more. But as you can see, it only weighs about 3 ounces. So I'm going to need to add a bit of lead, a bit of weight to this car in order to bring it up to the proper weight. And that is something that if you're building a kit, for example, that has to be glued completely together, you definitely want to add all of your lead to the interior, or all of your steel or whatever weight you're using to the interior of the car before you finish gluing that roof on. That is something that so many people I know have made that mistake of gluing the car together and then thinking afterwards, how am I going to add weight to this car? So that's something that, it could be added in here, but I prefer to keep it inside. Now, one thing I do want to point out about rolling stock, though, is you want to try to keep your center of gravity as low as possible. And that's why these Athearn cars, they have these steel weights here on the bottoms. So that means that you've got a very low center of gravity. And in this particular case, let's see, this is a 40-foot boxcar. Should weigh about 4 ounces. And it comes in at exactly 4 ounces. And that probably means that I did properly weight this car before I finished putting it together. So yeah, you can see I've added a couple of additional steel tire weights here to the inside of the car floor, and that keeps the center of gravity low. Avoid sticking any weights to the inside of the roof or to the sides. Always, whenever possible, use the floors. If you want to keep your floor clear for freight or whatever, put it towards the ends right over the truck, or you could stick it to the inside ends here of the car at the very bottom, just where above the floor level. But, this is probably the best place as far as I'm concerned. Stick with putting them right over the trucks themselves. Now, one warning. One thing that is all too common for people, modelers and people in general, is that if 1 ounce is great, maybe 2 ounces will be even better. Well, no, that's not the case. You don't want to overweight your car. One of the things that the NMRA committee found is that any excess weight above the NMRA's optimum amount will place additional friction on the wheels in the trucks and cause more drag. So you reach a point of no return or diminishing returns if you keep increasing the amount of weight that you're adding to the car above the NMRA recommended practice for your scale. So don't overdo it. Stick with the right amount and you'll have much, much better success. Now, one thing that I do want to point out also, this whole weighting scheme was developed back at a time when people were using the old Athearn plastic wheels with their steel axles and the whole 9 yards like that. They weren't the most smooth rolling and free rolling of options available. So I'm not exactly sure how the fact that our cars are much more free rolling now affects the NMRA recommended practice algorithm. You might be actually able to get away with slightly less than the optimum simply because you're using much more free rolling wheels now. And in my case, I always replace those old wheels with these Intermountain nickel-plated wheel sets. And it's an expensive option, but it gives you much, much better rolling and tracking of your cars. Well, that's about it for today's video. I hope that gives you some guidance on how you can weight your cars properly without overdoing it and putting too much drag on your trains. Like I said, I do this every time I purchase a new car or dig one out of storage. I'll check the weight, make sure it's properly weighted, and add additional weight if necessary. So take it easy, have a great weekend, and we'll see you here next week with another video from the DCC guy. Hopefully the clouds will part and I'll be able to get out and get some decent photographs to print up for the backdrops here on the model railroad. So we'll see you then. Bye now.